eat your heart out.
Okay. It's 6 o'clock, and welcome to the March 1st meeting of the governing body. I will call this meeting to order. If you will please stand as you are able for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing, for the invocation, and then remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'll direct your attention to Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you, Mayor. This evening, I decided that I would opt for a moment of silence. My outfit, as much as my wardrobe could handle it, is reflective of the flag of Ukraine. For the moment of silence, even as our own pandemic eases, at least for the moment, with the strife in Ukraine and with stress and trauma occurring around us, near and far, together, can we hope for the peacemakers and the caregivers everywhere to do everything they can to make the world a safer and better place? And may those peacemakers and caregivers be us. A moment of silence. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I was looking at, I thought that was mine.
Hey, let's hear you coming back for you.
Okay. If the clerk would call roll call, please.
Mayor Padilla,
Here.
Councilmembers Hiller,
Here.
Valdivia Aquila,
Here.
Ortiz,
Here.
Emerson,
Here.
Kell,
Here.
Nager,
Here.
Dobler,
Here.
Duncan,
Here.
and Lesser.
Here.
We have 10 present.
Thank you. Move on to appointments, if the clerk would read.
A is a board appointment recommending the appointment of Kevin Sykes to the People Sustainability Advisory Board for a term ending March 1, 2024. B is a board appointment recommending the reappointment of Darcella Goodman to the Shawnee County Community Corrections Advisory Board to fill an expired term ending March 2, 2024. And C is an advisory council appointment of Nicholas Tremall to the City of Topeka, Americans with Disabilities Act Advisory Council for a term ending March 1, 2024.
We have heard the appointments. I would entertain a motion.
Motion.
Second.
Motion by Councilwoman Nager, second by Councilman Emerson. If you call the roll, please.
Councilmembers Duncan,
Yes.
Lesser,
Yes.
Hiller,
Yes.
Valdivia Aquila,
Yes.
Ortiz,
Yes.
Emerson,
Yes.
Kale,
Yes.
Nager,
Yes.
and Dobler.
Yes.
We have 9 yes, motion carries.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Tremel and his son and his father and his son Wolf are here today. So I'd like to give you a round of applause. Pardon? Are any of the other appointees here today present?
Yes.
Okay.
both
Mr. Seek, pardon?
They're both here.
Mr. Seek, thank you for your service as well. Okay, we'll move on to,
Mayor, Mrs. Goodman is here also.
oh, I didn't see. Darcella? Oh, I wasn't sure. We were waiting to hear back from you. I have something for you as well. So thank you for being here, Darcella. Now, we'll move on to agenda item number 3, if the clerk would read.
We have a presentation from the Topeka Metro Transit Authority.
Mr. City Manager, or, okay, you're here. Go ahead.
Good evening. I'm Rod Miller. I'm a board member of the Topeka Metropolitan Transit Authority. With me also is Robert Nugent, who's our general manager, kind of keep it short and simple for you. It's our first time back in 2 years because of COVID. Obviously, kind of set us back some with everybody else's experience also. Ridership throughout COVID basically ran at 70% until we reinstated fares in February of last year, and it dropped to roughly a 60% ridership, an equal mix between full fare and reduced fare riders. So the folks who need to ride apparently continue to ride. Unlike large cities where ridership dropped to 20 and 15%, we had a fairly sustainable group of folks who rode the bus on a normal basis. We're still under federal mask mandate probably until the end of March, whenever the FTA and FAA release theirs. So right now, operators and riders, along with all staff, who anytime they're on a bus or on any of the properties, have to have a mask on. So that'll maintain until the federal mandate goes away. We did notice some major travel changes or patterns in ridership. Instead of going to and from work, it was more to the hospitals or to grocery stores or shopping, not necessarily to and from work. We have no idea whether that's going to maintain or stay, but it's one of those things that we're kind of leaning into to decide whether we need to make some adjustments in what we do. Relief funding. We received $10 million in both CARES and ARPA funding. Spending on that is driven by the formula that the federal government gives us. Part of that goes for operations, part of that goes for capital. So we don't get to spend it all on operations. We did use $6 million of it for that. $1 million of it was used to replace lost revenue. If you'll remember, back in March of 2020, we basically went to no fares until February 2021. So we went basically a year without revenue from ridership. And then $1 million was spent on COVID protocols. We had to put barriers in the buses, extra cleaning and those kind of things. We went to backdoor boarding to keep passengers away from the drivers and those kind of things. So we spent a significant amount of money on just meeting the COVID protocols. Currently, we're rethinking some of our services after what we've learned from our COVID ridership. If you'll see the little map there, you'll see some areas in there that are white, which would indicate no pickups or drop-offs. Yes, some of them are at cemeteries, so we're not picking people up there yet or dropping them off. So, but there are other areas that we think we can make some changes in our route structure that would add some efficiencies in what we do. And just as a note, here at our last board meeting, we voted to extend the flex zone into the High Crest area, so they would both have basically almost a door to system service, that basically a small van would go into the neighborhood, pick them up at their door, and take them to the route system. Plus, the fixed route system would remain in that neighborhood for the current time. So we've made some adjustments in those areas. And we're looking for some other adjustments that we can make throughout the system. So I think we'll have some good news coming in the next year in terms of accessibility and sustainability through the system for the amount of ridership that we have currently. The last bit, a year ago we received, or 2 years ago, we received a grant for electric buses. We're going to try a pilot project of three electric buses, just kind of it's kind of a math-intensive deal. 3 buses cost twice as much as 3 diesel buses. So, and they don't run as far, so we don't really know if we need 3 buses are going to replace only 2 buses, or we need 3 electric or 5 electric buses to replace 3 diesel buses. So we've got a study in progress to kind of work out the math of what that looks like within our system if we end up with 10% buses or 30% electric buses, and what that might look like. So that was, let you ask any questions you'd like. I probably know more than I should.
Councilman Kell.
I know one of the big concerns was getting students to school that rode the buses during this time. It even got to the point where, as a personal experience, that my daughters were having to pick up friends from like the rescue mission and other places to be able to get kids to school, because it was one of those things. Sometimes the bus routes, the way they were running, there'd almost be no guarantee they could get to school on time. or they'd be 2 hours late, so some of them just said, okay, forget it. So I think when we look at the routes, we definitely need to look at the schools and where those come into play on this, because I heard from a lot of people, and especially from the high school age range, the difficulty to get kids to school on time with the buses without having to get up at 5:15 in the morning to make sure they get the earliest bus to make sure they get to school on time. So I think that's one of those things. And then also the ride aspect of it seems like there's a large gap in those free passes for students that the schools are having a hard time getting those to be able to give those to the students. So then students are having a hard time getting to be able to ride the bus.
Yeah, that's a program that 501 has, and not necessarily something we administer, but we provide them. We have an agreement with them. We provide them the passes. Getting them into their hands is difficult. Our board chairman, Alan Bierman, his son is at Topeka West. Since he knew about the program, he went through the process just to figure out as a school project to find out how long it would take. It took him 3 weeks to get a pass. And we're talking about a child who knew that the program had existed. So it's a complicated bit that not all of it's in our hands, but we'll lean into that and see what else we can do with the school district to make sure that's available to them and that they use it.
All right, thank you.
Councilman Dobler.
Thank you. Appreciate the presentation. Talk a little bit, if you would, about the electric buses. What's the end game? Is it replace all diesel buses, or is it truly an experiment right now?
For us, it's an experiment right now.
Okay.
The federal government and Federal Transit Administration is pushing that particular technology. They're making grants available, but in our thinking, it needs to be sustainable for us. And yes, there's no fuel involved per se, but if the capital expenditure is twice as much, for $500,000 I can buy a lot of diesel fuel. So it becomes that, like I said, a math problem of what that looks like. The bus needs to last roughly 15 years, and right now, I think the longest anybody's had a bus out maybe is 5 years, so we don't really have a long life cycle history of what those fleets look like. And politely, those that have had them out, it's not been a positive experience. I can think of some of those in Texas and New Mexico. If the weather's between 68 and 72 all year long, they work pretty well, but the buses we're looking at have to have a diesel heater to keep the cab warm and the batteries warm. So, the fact that there are no tailpipe emissions, it doesn't mean it doesn't pollute. So there's some other things that we have to kind of figure out. And it's on all too new technology for most of us, and just trying to get our head around what that really means. Because we'd actually have to have, charging equipment at our bus facilities, and if power goes out overnight, we own 27 or 35, paperweights in the morning, and nobody's going anywhere.
Well, I appreciate the fact that you're experimenting, not going all in on electric buses, but experimenting a little bit, see where it goes. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to say thank you for having the public forum at the bus station, and thank you for listening to the constituents. They were very relieved when you said that you weren't going to cut out certain services. So I just wanted to personally say thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. Now, I'm not as good at higher math as my colleague, Mr. Lesser, is. Nevertheless, I was glad I could see his face now in this little thing. But nevertheless, you said you got about 10 million in CARES and ARPA funds, and it looks like what you have here is 8 million allocated.
So far, yeah. It doesn't come to us all at one time, so it's spread out over. We have to spend it, and then we have to apply for it. So, yeah, it's going to drag out before we get all that. But that's what we've been awarded and have available to us.
Okay. And I noticed on your slide, you said not all funds can be spent on operating service. But is that 2 million, the 2 million that you have yet to spend, will that allow you to keep your service without making cuts over the next foreseeable future, or?
Yeah. And let me phrase that as, we'll probably make changes like we did with the high crest and putting the flex zone in there. And that's part of what we've been on a 2-year kind of study of what our system looked like before COVID started. Because we still pulse from the same spot that the bus system did when it was the electric system that was owned by KP&L back in the 30s. So, getting someone to the southeast or the southwest corner of town is an hour round trip, where if we go to some other routes, they're only 30 minutes. So, having some of those thoughts about, what's good for the residents of Topeka, there's a commercial area that we don't really touch. There's lots of other things in there that we need to kind of think about. So yeah, that's going to be available to us. Those funds will be. And our issues that we had earlier this year with thinking about maybe cutting service were all based around personnel. We're down roughly 15 drivers. We're at roughly 35. We need 50 to run the basically the same service that we have been running. So basically, we've been running pretty hard for the last 24 months with COVID, and our employees are kind of spent, and we heard them during the holiday period about how they were tired of working overtime, and like, okay, if you guys, we don't want any more of you to quit, so what do we need to do to dial it back? And we, basically, when we were done with the conversation with the public, with our represented employees, they decided they could step up if we changed some of the scheduling. So basically, we were able to go without making any cuts in service.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you for your service on the board, and be remiss if I didn't recognize Mr. Ledbetter out there, who's also on the board. Thank you both for your service.
Oops.
Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala.
Thank you, Mayor. How many drivers are you currently short?
We'd like to have 15 more.
And what is your starting wage?
That's a good question. It's about $15 an hour, and then scales up into the mid-20s by the time you're been there about 24 months.
And benefits?
And benefits, right, capers, health insurance.
Were you ever able to determine exactly, why you lost so many? I know that's the great question, right? The great checkout that's happening with employees.
And most of our workforce was older. I think our median age is in the upper 40s. So, but we actually had a couple of deaths. We had several retirements, and then politely at the bottom of the totem pole, it's a 6-day-a-week job. So it's maybe not attractive to somebody who has a family life that, hey, you need to show up, and you may be working, you may not be working today, or you don't know what your hours are.
Wow. Okay. Thank you.
Councilman Kell.
Now, over the last probably year and a half, I noticed that you guys have done a lot on the stops on redoing those. But it looks like a lot of those are uncovered stops. Is there any reason to that? Because I know one complaint I've heard is people that ride the bus that have to sit there and maybe wait 20 minutes and get poured on. If there's any reasoning behind going to an uncovered stop.
Well, again, staff could probably give a more succinct answer, but basically we've come up with a grid of how many boardings or deboardings happen at a particular stop, and depending on the level of traffic at that particular stop, depends on whether it gets basically a concrete slab, it gets a slab and a bench, or it gets a cover. So if it's just one person gets on once a day or twice a week, it's probably just going to be a slab. Now, the flip side of that is, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it was just standing in the mud on the side of the road. So we're coming along. I think we've put in 600 or 700. Is that right?
We've got about 300 stops. We have about 150 that have amenities.
Okay, so 150. But we have 600 stops or something like that?
No, about
300? Okay. All right. Like I said, those technical details I don't have in my head. So, but yeah, we've come a long way in improving what the stops look like. But yeah, how we kind of gauge how much money we're going to spend on those particular stops depends on what ridership looks at that stop.
But on something like that, couldn't you monetize those stops with advertisements, just like some of the bigger cities do, and then help with some of the costs that you have on bus fare raising, or having to cut routes or things like that, or even going as recruitment to get new drivers? Those that's sitting there right next to major intersections sometimes, and to me, it could be a great advertisement base.
We used to have a bus sign contract for advertising, but, and it's grandfathered in under the old ones, but I was going to say you guys, but it probably wasn't all you. The city changed its advertising ordinance in the right away. So basically, we're at this point can't go back to advertising on the benches and on the stops. So we had a carve out, and that went away when the rule got changed.
I thought the advertisement was 45 feet away, and most of those bus stops, like when you go next to Topeka West, across the street from McDonald's, it's nearly 100 feet away from the intersection. So I think that would,
Okay, well,
that would qualify, though.
I'll have to have our council look at that, because that was what was told to us.
Could you, for myself and for people watching, give a little more detail to this, the flex zone that you've extended into High Crest?
Sure. Bob, you want to give the details of exactly how that works?
So a flex zone is a little bit different than a fixed route. What we understand is a fixed route is a big bus operating in a big corridor, right? Mm-hmm. So what a flex zone basically does, it provides a service more curb to curb instead of on a major street where you have to walk out to the stop. So what it tends to do is kind of de-evolutionize transit. So you kind of take it apart from a fixed route where you have to have a lot of people to get on a big bus to operate. This kind of takes it back and says, okay, where is the ridership? Where are the people coming from? So it gives you a chance to kind of develop a route based on where you find that ridership. So flex service, the way we're operating it today, you have to call about 24 hours in advance. So if you think about it, that means that we all have a car sitting in our garage, right? So if we want to go somewhere, we can go like that and move. It's a disadvantage to have people that have to call 24 hours in advance. So we're looking at other things in the future, like microtransit, which is kind of Uber-esque. So you'd be able to get on your app, get a trip within a short period of time, within an hour or two, you could be on a bus and ready to go. So we're migrating from, we're taking the existing flex route and just expanding that area for a while. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to work on getting apps and the software to move into a more microtransit kind of version.
Currently, what portions of the city are served by a flex route? Is it primarily High Crest, or are there other areas?
No, it's east of High Crest. It's out around California,
okay,
kind of in that area, just north of Lake Shawnee and in that area. Okay. And the way we're operating now, they get on the flex bus. It takes them to a stop, usually to like Walmart on California, and then they go. So in a flex route, you'd be able to travel inside a zone. So you could travel within that zone to another place, which is a little bit easier to use also. So.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Sure.
Further questions? Looking online. Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you. Two questions. One related to the flex routes, but I remember some years ago, all you had was the big buses, and people would say, well, why don't you have 15-passenger vans? And the answer at the time was that they weren't as cost-effective, didn't last as long, and so on. Obviously, you have shifted into that. Could you talk about kind of
The thought process there?
the thought process, and if they're only in your flex zones, then maybe you've already covered it, but just where they are in your fleet, how that compares to the big buses, and where you...
Well, sure. Because when you look at the cost of operating a big bus or a small bus, a big bus runs 500,000 miles or 600,000 miles. A cutaway small bus lasts maybe 150 to 100,000 miles. So basically, and they cost $80,000, $90,000 all in. So over the life cycle of the small bus versus the big bus, it's the same in terms of asset cost. and pretty much the same in terms of gasoline, and the same for the driver, one driver for each of those. So the operating cost per mile or per hour is pretty much the same. So if I run a small bus up and down, say, 6th Street, but I have to send a second bus, because the first one's full, because it only has 15 people in it, and I need to carry 40 or 30, all of a sudden I'm going backwards in terms of operating costs. So the bigger bus on a route that has lots of ridership makes a lot of sense. So again, if you'll look at the little graph that we gave you about what the routes look like, you'll find some spots there in southeast Topeka in the far corner, and maybe in the High Crest area where there's no, it looks like there's gaps in ridership. Tells you there's not a lot of drop-offs or pickups, which basically would tell you that, you know, a flex route would work well for that particular area, but we're going to try it first to make sure that we're right before we, you know, make any other kind of substantial change to what we do.
If I could ask a second question.
Yes.
It often comes up regarding people that have shift work and people that are working at the big factories in terms of transportation that can be relied on year-round and so on to get them to work. Could you talk about where you are, if at all, in conversations or thought about being the provider for that?
Well, we haven't thought about it in a while. We were, say, a partner. We basically administered Go Topeka and some of the employers down south in the industrial park down there, along with Reesers and some others. But basically, they were able to provide a 24-hour taxi service, if you will, for those employees who worked at those places, because our fixed route system doesn't always go down there. Well, it actually just didn't go down there. It's just too far away. So for us basically to stand up and operate a full-time, 24-hour service like that basically puts us in the taxi cab business, if you will. And the taxi cab provider that we had at the time withdrew from that partnership because they were kind of getting run ragged, providing 24-hour service for that. So again, money solves a lot of problems. That's probably one we can throw a lot of money at. But I'm not sure that the per person usage or benefit, even though that may sound harsh, it may be worth the expense, because every time that partnership moved, I think it was a 3-step partnership. Basically, the first time Go Topeka paid for the whole thing. The second one was part employer, part Go Topeka, and the last one was going to be all the employer.
Right.
Well, we had a steep drop off after the first hurdle when the employer had to start paying, and then by the time we got to the all employer, nobody was in. Well, I take that back. I think we had 2 employers that were in, and nobody else was involved in it. So even though they may talk a strong game about, hey, we need this, they're not putting their money where their mouth is.
Well, maybe it takes all of us to advance this agenda, not you alone, but everybody's hungrier right now than they were 2 years ago. And I know, for instance, I have a neighbor whose car went out and he could not get to work at Frito-Lay and couldn't get home. And my thought always goes back to before any of this stuff started. To me, if there was a way to run a bus, and maybe now that you're doing the vans, those make more sense, from like 10 to midnight, that could help pick up and drop off people who were shift workers, and then be able to do a round in the morning at 6 and 7 to pick people up. And maybe it would need advance arrangements and so on, but it really makes a difference. And people have very strongly advocated that they want our people who live here to get those good jobs. But I know that people hold back from even applying those jobs for those jobs because they're afraid they might not be able to get to work regularly. And I know that you're aware of that too. Since you're here, thought it was probably time to bring it up again because
I had a son actually working at one of the warehouses on the second shift, and why didn't you use the system? And he goes, well, they came in at 11 o'clock tonight and told me I had 2 hours of overtime. So if I'd have called for a 12 o'clock pickup, I'd have been 2 hours. So
right.
It's
not easy.
It's not easy, and that as one of our board members says, there's always a simple easy explanation that's always wrong. So So again, it's it's a more complicated picture than, we need to have some flexibility in that. And politely, a robust taxi and Uber service in the city are some of those, things that we'd love to see because they complement what we do for the citizens.
And right now, you know it, maybe everybody else doesn't, we don't have cab service right now. I mean, there's nothing. It costs $20 to get a ride to work. So maybe we can put our hats on again. Thank you for answering the question, because I know that the idea of service to Montera has also been discussed before, and hope, again,
Lots of
may
work.
take us too, but
Yes.
talking about it. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Any further questions? Before you leave, I would be remiss if I didn't at least recognize the effort that you did make working with Go Topeka and GTP and trying to bring that workforce transportation to some kind of resolve. I know what you speak of and how it went from pretty good to not so good to just kind of faded away. And I know people really depended on that. And I was hoping that during that time they would have been finding other resources, or that entrepreneurs would see that opportunity like you suggest for a new taxi service or Uber or something that would be more flexible to fit those needs for those flex shifts, because that's difficult to try and be there when they're getting off at work and getting there late at night. So I know that you made an effort, and I appreciate that.
Certainly. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for your
All
presentation.
right. Thank you.
Okay, Madam Clerk, we'll move on to item number 4 on the agenda.
4 is A, minutes of the special meeting of January 15, 2022, minutes of the special meeting of February 12, 2022, and the regular meeting of February 15, 2022, and there are no applications.
Move approval.
We have a motion to approve from Councilman Dobler, second from Councilman Kell. If you will read the roll call vote, please.
Councilmembers Lesser,
Yes.
Mayor Padilla,
Yes.
Councilmembers Hiller,
Yes.
Valdivia Aqua,
Yes.
Ortiz,
Yes.
Emerson,
Yes.
Kale,
Yes.
Nager,
Yes.
Dobler,
Yes.
and Duncan.
Yes.
We have 10 yes, motion carries.
Motion carries. Move on to action items, number 5 on our agenda, if the clerk would read.
A is a resolution introduced by the Public Infrastructure Committee comprised of council members Tony Emerson, Neil Dobler, and Mike Lesser, recommending approval of unexpected repair projects and budgeting for other unexpected repairs and replacements for the 2022 firm program.
Thank you. Who is the chair? Mr. Emerson? Councilman Emerson, would you speak to this, please?
Sure, Mayor, and I want to point out, the record is not correct in here. I voted against myself being chair. So it was 2-1. I want to make that clear. Yes, so at our meeting on February 15th, Ms. Ulrich and Mr. Tryon brought forward this. There are 3 immediate repairs that they had to proceed with. And so they basically they're bringing that forward and want us to go ahead and acknowledge and okay that these repairs. Again, these are the type of things they can't wait. When there's a hole in the ceiling, they can't say, well, we got to wait till next month when that committee meets, and then we got to wait for the city council. By the very nature, these are repairs that have to be made right away. So I do appreciate the way we ask them to bring this stuff to us. They're working within that to bring these things to us, but they can't do it ahead of time because they don't know when something's going to break. So I'm happy to answer any questions, or I'm happy to ask Ms. Ulrich to come up as well if anyone has more technical questions.
Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, can you tell me what this is for, and is this the total amount?
Yes, ma'am. This is for 3 different repairs. It was the holiday parking garage repair, which the assessment and the design estimate is $39,000. The estimated repair cost is $145,000. And that is still in progress, and They won't know the total amount until it's actually done. So those are estimates. The second is the T-PAC roof, which the emergency cost of that repair was $13,488. And there is some other, there is some further information in here that I think further, and please, anyone correct me if I'm wrong here, but there's further repairs that there's longer term repairs that need to be made to the roof. However, we're also hoping to do some HVAC work with the ARPA funds, I believe. And so that would be done at that time. But right now, $13,488 for the T-PAC roof. And lastly, the City Hall condensation repairs. We had a tank spring a leak, and it's the tank that, it's a condensation tank, I guess. There was not a tank immediately available, so what they've done, they have a tank we're renting right now for $4,000 a month. And the replacement should be here in about three to 4 months. So they have $8,000 for what they've done so far to temporary it, $16,000 estimated total for the rental of the temporary tank, and then $35,000 for the actual permanent fix. So altogether, these are $256,488, basically $256,500. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the public to hear that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further questions for the chair or committee members?
Move approval.
Have a motion to approve by Councilman Dobler.
Second.
Have a second by Councilman Emerson. Clerk, if we would call the roll vote.
Mayor Padilla,
Yes.
Councilmembers Hiller,
Yes.
Valdivia Aquila,
Yes.
Ortiz,
Yes.
Emerson,
Yes.
Gale,
Yes.
Nager,
Yes.
Dobler,
Yes.
Duncan,
Yes.
and Lesser.
Yes.
We have 10 yes, motion carries.
Okay, motion being carried. Move on to the non-action items on the agenda, if the clerk would read.
Is discussion regarding the process for the recruitment of a city manager.
Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, Governor Body. Tonight, we'll talk about the RFP process that was put out. We had 4 respondents to that. County Clerk, City Clerk, if you'd pass that out. This here is just a quick synopsis of the 4 bids that we have. And at this time, I will turn it back over to you, Mayor, for discussion amongst the governing body. Reference these 4 bids, and we're here to answer any questions you may have.
Take a moment while they read that before we get that
Yeah, it should have
discussion.
been, it was part of your packet as well.
Ms. Goodman, if I give this to you in case you decide you need it, I'll make sure you get it. Thank you, Steve. Thank you.
I do have a question, Mayor.
Deputy Mayor Duncan.
Just for everyone's edification, will you explain there were 2 others, but I see the note in here is determined to be non-responsive to RFP provisions, RP, we just define what that means.
Yeah, it basically means that they didn't meet all the criteria in their response to the RFP.
Have any further questions from the body about the information before them with regards to this RFP search? Assisting us, Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess my question is this just for our information, or are we supposed to pick one of these tonight?
I believe the mayor and I had conversation. These are the 4 that were available for you to review. This is an opportunity for you to review and have discussion about that. And then I believe that the mayor will ask staff for recommendations.
Okay, thank you, City Manager. Thank you, Mayor.
I think it's important that we have the opportunity to ask questions of the city manager, a little more detail about, what he was trying to accomplish at our request in seeking a local business to help us in our search rather than going to a nationwide effort. Quite honestly, I think we discussed this. I was a little disappointed that we didn't have more that were interested in this effort. I do still believe strongly, if we can, to keep our search as controlled locally as much as we can, and even consider the possibility that maybe we do it ourselves and do a process that is as stringent and as any other professional company may want to provide for us. But I would like to hear some comments from the council with regards to a preference on this. I think if you could answer the question, City Manager, about, I see you, Councilman Lesser, about the cost from one of these bids that you and I had discussed.
Yeah, so as you see, the cost is there, and we did, with the local firm, they did say that that price is open for negotiation. As you see, other three are from California, and then two from Illinois. And one of them from Illinois, it does have like a Topeka representative in the area that has held positions in the area, and so is familiar with Topeka. So as you see, the cost varies from $45,000 down to $23,500. But with all that being said, if you look at the $23,500, they charge per hour. They also charge for daily rate for things above and beyond. And then all of them have plus expenses. And plus expenses would be when they fly here, do we have conversation with them? When they bring people in or what have you, those would be additional cost.
Councilman Lesser?
I think that you guys answered a couple of the questions that I had in regards to that. I think that was my other question, was the plus expenses is obviously hotel rooms, dinner, meals, transportation, airlines, et cetera, depending on the process and how if they're sitting in on interviews, if they're, on and on and on and on. I think those numbers can add up pretty quickly to get to where the flat fee is, where I can't imagine what obviously I'd like to have a local preference. At the same point in time, I want to be fiscally responsible, but at the same time, I would bet my life that 45 plus expenses compared to 39,625 for Rockland, California plus expenses. At the end of the day, we're going to be cheaper staying local just in that situation. I just use that as an example. So I'm not as hung up from the initial price because I think when you compare them, do we have any other, I don't know if there's I know we're just open for discussion. I'd like to have a little bit of maybe to make for next week when we do give our opinion or recommendation or selection. Well, is that how that's going to work, Mr. Mayor? Is it going to come up next week as an action item for us to make a selection, or is that going to be just something that the mayor has the authority to make? I'm fine either way.
The intent that I understand is for the body to discuss it today as a non-action item, give some indication of a preference as to how the city manager will move forward, either with any of the parties here listed, or consider an alternative that we can make a selection on it, because I think I would rather that we have all an opportunity to have our input. One of the things I look at here with this one for $45,000, they do currently contract with the city of Topeka. So some questions I would have would be about what has their performance been? Are we satisfied with those kinds of referrals that we're getting and the personnel that we're getting from there? Again, I think it's important that we give some real thought to still trying to keep it local, not just for the sake of local, but for cost involved as well. So that's my understanding. City Manager, correct me if I'm wrong.
Correct. It was a little disappointing that we only had one local firm, since we did put such an emphasis on trying to identify local recruiting and that. There are a couple options. We could repost it and see if we have any people do apply. But my recommendation, if you would like to hear that, I can give that.
Okay. Before you do, Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you, Mayor. If I may, let me jump on this and fast forward a little bit. We already decided that we wanted to hire a firm, so I think the idea of not doing it unless the council wants to change its mind, there was consensus that we wanted to hire a company. We also were advised that there would be kind of a protocol that that company would go through, that they would get, and that I assume was based on experience that we've had in the past, which we have had a fair amount recently, that they would grab on, then they would get input to make sure that the job description was what we want it to be before it goes out. They would do a piece also about the city. Ideally, I would think we have I actually am kind of impressed that our local companies didn't apply. I think they had the opportunity, and as far as I know, you got the word out, but I respect the fact that we're hiring a city manager here, and if we want a company that has experience doing that, both setting the qualifications and vetting folks at this level, they may have opted out. I don't know. As far as the process, I would have to think that when we've hired before, the consultant has been virtual in some cases, even though nobody did virtual back then, and we also did our interviews virtually. And now, of course, that's much more commonplace. I would assume that no matter who the company is, we would deal with our consultant in this place, but either live or virtually, it really wouldn't matter. And that the only expenses that we're talking about in these boxes would be the expenses of bringing our final candidates in to meet everyone, which would be the expenses would be the same. Again, I don't know if you talked or thought that through, but if we're not going to be paying on top of that to have the consultant, whether they're local or however far away, be here live to talk to us, it's probably all the same. The question I would have then is, of the experience that we have here, it's quite varied. The local company has just done, looks like kind of local employment. We have two that have done a lot of city manager work. Did we check references with any of those cities or the named?
No, these are just the RFPs. These were the
Okay, so
closed
we haven't
bids.
vetted them in terms of their performance.
Correct.
Like how successful it was with the city manager that they recommended, for instance, and how long that worked out. I think that's an important part when you're hiring somebody, is to make sure that they're operating at the level that we want, so that we get the right service when we get to that point. Thank you.
Councilman Kell, then Councilman Dobler, and Deputy Mayor Duncan.
I agree with Ms. Hiller on would like to go local, but if you look at their two options, option one's about $60,000 to $70,000 off of what the previous city manager made, using that compensation aspect, or $45,000, which is a great difference between, the set of $32,000 down there. So there's almost a $22,000 difference, and we can use that money a lot other places. But again, they almost look like also the two that have the least experience. So I think maybe trying to look into a little bit of the background, like Councilwoman Hiller said. But I want to see, at least the ACI has a local rep, so they know what's going on around Topeka. it saves a lot more money on my aspect of things.
Councilman Dover.
Any idea why the firms that have helped us in the past did not answer this RFP?
I wonder.
The best explanation I can give is really we put such an emphasis on local firm, and I would assume that they were aware of that. But other than that, there's no explanation as to why.
Follow up, please.
Yes.
The firm from Chicago only has one city manager recruitment, is that correct?
From what we could tell from their bid, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I mean, obviously, this is the first we've seen this, so digesting it is, I guess I'm digesting it as we sit here a little bit. I am disappointed there weren't more local. I know we talked about local, but I thought maybe we did a poor job of communicating the local included Kansas, or Kansas City, Lawrence, Manhattan, whatever that region was. I don't know if we've had issues with companies in the past that just didn't want to work with us this time. I don't know. I guess what I say to all the Topeka firms out there who have told us in the past they want these opportunities, where were you? Where are you? Because I don't see you here. So I'm a little confused because I had some who reached out and said, oh, we're looking, I don't see them on here. And so I'm frustrated by that. I don't know what the recommendation from staff is going to be, which we'll hear. I guess what I'll say is this. I'm not going to pick the best of the worst. I mean, if we feel like, well, these are the four who we have and we have to pick one of them because these is it, I'm not comfortable saying, well, we said we were going to pick a firm and this is what's in front of us, so we better pick one of these. I mean, I'll start this process over from my perspective and see if we get anybody else, if we can, tweak an RFP and have to wait another 30 days to do that. That's just, where I'm coming from. And again, these are first random thoughts as I digest this with the rest of you. And if that means that we either try that approach or we sit here and say we're rather with going some sort of internal hybrid approach, using someone from outside to double check some things for us and help us push out the advertisements and whatnot, but do it staff, I guess we'll look at that too. But yeah, I think general disappointment that there was less local even from this region who jumped in on this. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilman Dover.
Thanks, Mayor. These searches really boil down to the person that's doing the search, the main person doing the search, and it's really tough to make any kind of decision based on the information we have. So it'd really help if we had, I assume they had resumes in their response, they had more information on, their past searches, all those kind of things. We really need that material before we can make much of a decision here. This just isn't enough. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilman Hilder.
Looping back, I mean, we really only have one firm on here that has done city manager recruiting. If in fact, and I don't know anything about them, no, don't know anything about any of the four of them actually, but when you look at the experience on here, I mean, city managers are different. They're very unique roles, and understanding cities and understanding city managers is important to helping a council or a governing body of any size sift through what the applicants are. This organization, assuming that we would not have them come in person, would be the least expensive, a reasonable turnaround, and has done city manager hiring before. We checked references and they had, and also the cities that are named are similar sizes to ours, not small towns and not real big cities. So those are all favorable in my view in terms of the experience of that firm. Still would want to check references, but would encourage everybody to sort of look at it through that lens as well.
Councilman Lesser.
I'll point out three things on that. Number one, the local firm is what I would call the premier local firm in Topeka. They go under several different names, just depending on what their whether they're doing day employees, whether they're doing permanent placement, whether they're doing searches such as this. So that's number one. Everyone's heard, I mean, this is premier personnel, this is the key staff, this is one of the major firms in Topeka that we all know of. That just happens to be the name that they're underneath for this type of search form, number one. Number two, I will point out that the national search forms that we've used with the experience with city managers has worked out so well the last 3 times that I'm not exactly that impressed with whether we're going to go that direction. I'll be just straight honest with you. That's all roses and that's the answer. You know, my dad would always say, don't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining. That hasn't worked. So that is what it is. And then the third point is, as the city manager did say, is, you know, the first firm did say, depending on what, you know, at the first stage, the local firm did say that they were willing to negotiate on the fee. And at the same time, I think there has to be an expectation of what are these expenses and an estimate of what those are. I mean, I would love to give a bid that said, you know, I know Tony would love to give a bid and get the job and say, here's my price plus expenses. You know, I'd love to have that, you know, just, you know, and then my expenses end up being more than what my contract was. Those are called change orders. And so I think you take all those into perspective, and I don't think it takes a lot of due diligence to ask the firms. Another question is, give us an expectation of what your expenditures are going to be. If you're going to be here 4 times, I can get on, you know, on the internet and see what an airline ticket costs. I know what a hotel, I mean, this isn't that complicated. But I do know locally, if we go and visit with them, what are your expenses? Well, our expenses are, you know, I can't imagine what they would be unless it was something out of the ordinary that we would expect. It wouldn't be attending meetings. They're going across town, that's included in their fee. So I am with the mayor that I'd like to have a little bit more information. But the fact that getting too excited about city manager experience, or I am glad that the firms that we have used in the past have not applied, because they'd be off mine real quick. So I think taking all that into totality, it's not just looking at what the 45,000, 23,000, et cetera, that would be short-sighted to think that's what the cost is going to be. Thank you.
Councilman Dover, then Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll express my reservations again with the firms that do a lot of city manager searches. The pool of qualified city managers is pretty small. It's a big country, small pool. These firms tend to know which city managers are nearing the end of their shelf life, you know, 5, 6 years, counting the votes, just about time to go. And those are the ones they reach out to and recruit for these positions. First of all, they can't recruit somebody they've just placed by contract. So they're, again, I guess we've tried this before. I think we're committed to looking for somebody for the city manager position that's as local as possible. I don't know why we can't figure out if it's not the local firm here, some kind of hybrid, maybe with the local firm, supplemented with our staff or something. We need to just figure out something that makes sense, and let's roll on this. I don't think we need to spend another 6 months debating which firm from California or Chicago, Illinois makes the most sense. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Just 2 things. First of all, let's rewind. We specifically had a conversation about whether we were going to include or exclude a requirement that you recruited a city manager previously, and we took that out. Because our conversation was it was more important to us to have somebody who was more tied into what Topeka needed or could hire good people that understood what that role was versus saying you need a city manager. So that was not even part of our RFP. You must have had that experience. So I'm not backtracking on that. I still believe in that, and I will not hold that against any firm because that wasn't part of our initial criteria. And the second thing is, and I think it's already become clear, and I'm sure staff will get us, obviously, if we could see these responses, that will provide a lot more context to help us make a determination. So, thank you.
Councilman Kell.
Just looking over one of these firms here, you can see a lot of repeat business through that, like you said, the shelf life of being like 5-6 years, that they have had, it looks like success on having cities come back to them. So I think that should be looked at as a positive, and then showing that they are successful if cities are coming back to them over and over that 3 to 5, 6 year time frame. They are placing good candidates that are staying there, and that they have them come back again.
If I may, I think what our intent was, at least in my mind, was that in looking for a search firm that was familiar with Topeka, it would be the first step in letting that firm seek out and vet local talent in our region, so that we would have both the search firm and the candidates that we feel would be most familiar with our community and give us the quickest and most, I think, in-depth understanding of where we are right now and where we want to be in the future, without having to look for someone who's going to come in and there's going to be a turnaround to learn the community, learn who we are, pick up on all the things that are going on in Topeka. And so the idea for me was that we coordinate both the search firm and the candidates that come in. Deputy Mayor does bring up a point with regards to whether or not we were specific enough or clear enough in what a local search firm, where it would be located. I'm more focused on the candidates that are coming in than the proximity, I guess, of the search firm. I do think there's merit to still staying with the local firm and looking at that as a partner with our local staffing, with city manager and human resources, and that it's a hybrid approach, so that we're able to keep an eye on the whole process, make sure that it's going in the direction this body has discussed about having local talent take the opportunity to become our next city manager. So I think a little more discussion, a little more detail to maybe how that would maybe look and presented to us would help me anyway, and maybe the rest of the body, in figuring out exactly how that animal would look, how that hybrid would look. Councilman Kell.
Now, something we could do is put preference towards a local candidate, but I know I've reached out to several people I believe are qualified for the position, just to kind of have them start thinking about it. And honestly, I keep on getting a lot of no's. And people, in essence, they love Topeka, they love living here, they've lived here for years, but they're not wanting to take this position. So, like it was said earlier, it's a small pool of people that are wanting to be city managers. And it's one of those things that it's just like us sitting here. It takes the person with the right mentality to do certain jobs. So we can always put a preference on local candidates, but I just know from my research and calling certain people and having conversations, the ones I've talked to so far, it's all a no.
Further comment or question? Councilwoman Hiller and Councilman Emerson.
Just one last one. I'm flexible about how we make this decision. I assume, since it would be that maybe what we need is an executive session if we're actually going into a contract, reviews of qualifications and decisions. What I do think is that we need to make this decision next week and get going, because it's already been 3 months that we've known about this, and we need to get we need to get the hiring process started, so.
Thank you. Councilman Emerson?
Thank you, Mayor. And I don't know how far we want to wade into this tonight, but I had actually a question on the actual, on our, let me scroll up to the top and see what this document's called. The job description for the city manager that we have, and specifically has like education qualifications at the bottom, and it says section weight 0%. And I don't know if that means that these are just the minimum qualifications. If you don't meet these, you're just out of contention, or it means we're not, or the 0% means we're not considering education or anything. But in case we are, I guess one of the things, I think earlier when we talked, I think, maybe I should just speak for myself. But I think several of us have expressed frustration with, in the past, we get the same search firms, there's the same 4 or 5 or 6 national firms, and they have the same 10 or 20 candidates always. And frankly, I would rather have somebody that was not a normal candidate, that doesn't come out of, has been in a bureaucratic role. So one of the things in here, it says minimum 10 years responsible administrative municipal public agency experience. And I don't know if that means those are all together. They need to have administrative and municipal and public agency experience, or if it's an or, if it's any of those, because frankly, I think Councilman Lesser said this when we spoke about this a couple months ago. If we get a Cody Foster type or Jim Klossman in here applying, I don't care that they haven't been in government for 10 years. I want somebody who can grow things and can get organizations performing well. And I see we keep putting the same thing in here that basically, well, those guys aren't qualified, even though they're frankly more than qualified. So I guess that's just my thing. I don't want to see anything in here that basically means we'll get the same, central casting that we have in the past.
Central casting.
Central casting,
That's a good
yes.
way to put it, yeah. City manager, did you have something?
No, just whenever you're ready.
I agree that we have to be looking forward, and I think that what we have done in the past as a city is go to that same pool of applicants. I see that when we look at police chiefs, fire chiefs, whatever. You start going to those same pools of people that are just moving on to their next opportunity with maybe not the full intent of staying here beyond 5 years. And I'd like to see somebody who's going to come here, who's part of this community, who wants to stay here, grow this city, and be here for an extended period of time and get some consistency to our city manager position. So I'm still wanting to really work hard to keep that local thought of a corporate executive or somebody who has got the experience, maybe not in government, but a captain of industry who has grown a business, who knows how to administer multiple budgets, staff personnel, keep projects on course. I think those people are here. We just maybe haven't reached them yet, despite what might have been coming to us when you just ask randomly. I know I've been asked at a couple of meetings I've been to. They haven't said they want the job. They asked me, are you guys still looking for a city manager? So there's some interest out there, and I think we just need to grow that interest as best we can and craft that job description like you suggest to make sure that we're not excluding by our own job description those people who could really become interested in being our next city manager. So I think a real look at that and fine tuning of that job description to make sure that we wordsmith it correctly, and then really look again at, I don't think that putting it off for another round of posting is helpful. I think it's just going to get us back to where we are again, having similar discussion. So, city manager, if you had a recommendation, do you want to still give it, or do you want to hold off until we bring this up next?
Oh, no, I'm ready to give a recommendation.
Okay. I just want to test the waters.
So just a couple things real quick. Expenses also include advertising and stuff like that, when they say additional expenses. So that would be included in there. And when we talk about the job description, Councilman Anderson, where it says 0%, those are performance. So when you do the evaluation on the individual, so it's not for the posting purposes, it's really for evaluation purposes.
Yes, Councilman?
Thank you, Mayor. But I guess, City Manager, thank you for that clarification. But are those then binary? You either meet that or you can't be considered?
Well, it's kind of like for performance evaluation for a police officer, you have to have a valid driver's license. That's also on the performance indicator. You have to have it, but it gets zero weight, when it comes to the evaluating process. Does that make sense?
Right, but you wouldn't hire them without, that's a minimum qualification.
No, they have to have a valid driver's license to be hired.
And so the point I was trying to make, probably didn't make it very eloquently, but I just don't want something in here that puts someone who's otherwise qualified out of contention because they didn't do something in government for 10 years. Because frankly, maybe it should be the other way around. If you have been in government for 10 years, you're not eligible. So,
Right.
anyway.
And
Sorry, editorial comment.
Right, and minimum qualifications and experience is and/or. It's not, you have to have this, it's and/or. So when you say 10 years experience.
Well, that I guess that'd be very helpful if we can make that explicit then.
Sure.
So
And
if
that
somebody
was,
wants to apply.
and that would be one of the things, is that job description would be totally reviewed before we meet with the
Thank you.
the firm.
Thank you, Mayor.
My recommendation?
Yes.
Okay. My recommendation is this. I feel very strongly that we have very qualified staff within the city of Topeka. That includes myself and the city attorney and the HR director, that we can put together a much better process, a much more effective process, and produce you a list of candidates that are much more qualified for the city of Topeka than any search firm can do. Search firms are going to identify individuals that are city managers that are looking for jobs to move on to. And city of Topeka is not a destination for final retirement for most people as a city manager. So I believe it becomes very important, if we are looking for someone that wants to move the city forward and be a part of this city, we need to find somebody relatively local that knows the city and is invested in it. And I guarantee you, and I know it's a big guarantee, that I feel very strongly that we can produce you a list of candidates, go out and recruit candidates, and provide you a much better list of individuals. Councilman Duncan spoke very eloquently to the fact that we decided you don't necessarily have to have city manager's experience. So that opens up a lot of options when it comes to recruiting and identifying. A hedge hunting firm is not going to identify individuals per se. They have a list of individuals that are looking for jobs, that are always looking for jobs, and they move on. City manager's tenure is really 3 to 5 years. But if we have somebody local that's invested in the community, then that 3 to 5 years probably expands anywhere from 7 to 10. And so with the staff that we have and the ability to do, I believe, a better recruiting, identifying, and search than any outside firm could do. I do agree with Councilman Dobler in the aspect that that local company already does business with the city, and we can expand that to include working with us on that search process. But the thing that Councilwoman Hiller hit on, I think, is very important. And my idea would be that we get applicants and we look at it. We would actually go just like we do when we hire police officers. If you're from Garden City, for example, we send a hiring and background officer out to Garden City and interviews the resume that they present, jobs where they work, references, and all that other stuff. And so, to me, I would be looking at that type of a process. But that's my recommendation. Also, we can get you more information on these 4 that have submitted their RFP. Tonight was really just to dabble in it, shall we say, and give you a little bit of background. and see what your thoughts were, but we can definitely get you more information on those search firms. And so I'm not looking for an answer tonight, but I am looking for a little sense of direction as to feeling as to where we'd like to go. Or we can get you the additional information on these 4 search firms, and then I can stand by and wait for your direction.
Councilman McHale and then Councilwoman Valdivia-Alcala.
So part of what I gathered from there, I guess, is you saying yourself, Ms. Stanley, and the HR director would be the 5th option, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I like that option.
I got you, Councilman. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, that's like a really bold idea. I mean, everybody's really busy and backed up and overcommitted and all of that, and so no offense, but I think I have some concerns about city staff going out and looking for folks. I'm just going to be really blunt. It just is a little bit too political sounding to me. I would be more inclined to find out more about, get more information on the possibilities that we have. This is my first round with choosing a city manager, but I know we're saying close to home and local, but that whole process just smacks a little bit too close to home to me, and I think that there needs to be more separation than that. That's just my thoughts. Thank you.
Councilman Lesser? You're on mute, Mike.
My apologies. So, city manager, so am I hearing you correctly that it would go to something of a hybrid? I believe it was, I think Neil maybe brought it up when we were talking earlier. So are you talking about then a hybrid type plan where you would use the city resources that you stated with Amanda, you, Jackie, et cetera, and then you would then work with the local provider to have them basically then rescale their proposal to you based on that from a cost perspective and a responsibility perspective? Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yeah, we'd engage them in conversation as to what that would look like. Again, when we talk about a firm that goes out and recruits, they're not really going to be identifying anybody specific from this area or whatever. They're going to be looking at that list of city managers that are wanting to move on to another job. And so, again, this is just an option. Ask for my opinion. I gave you my opinion, and my opinion weighs as much as you want it to weigh.
No, I like the hybrid idea. I mean, I like the hybrid idea of using internal resources as well as then the pieces that come from a firm locally to assist then with those other items that either they have more of an expertise on or can spread the responsibilities out, and then at the same time reduce the cost. So I like that idea.
Deputy Mayor, okay, Deputy Mayor Duncan.
If I promise to be nice, can I ask Jackie Russell a couple questions? I promise I'm going to be nice. No, these won't be too hard. Mostly clarification. The first one would be, I mean, I assume you've had this conversation with the city manager, and this wasn't a surprise, his recommendation this evening. And I don't know, I haven't talked to you, but I want to make sure you, since a lot of this would fall on your plate to some degree, make sure that you're okay with that recommendation.
Yes, we talked about the recommendation. I'm fine with the recommendation.
And I would like to clarify, really, it's gonna be a hybrid regardless, because we have to work closely with the recruiter to get you all the information that you need on the candidates and helping with the process of identifying the position description. So typically, in the last several searches, human resources, myself, I've walked through that whole process with the external recruiter and the governing body.
And my only other question was just process-wise, when we hire department heads, that's traditionally mostly done in-house also, correct?
Yes, we have done those in-house under my tenure here.
The few exceptions, obviously, when we go out of staff is when we have hired a city manager. I mean, I know there's always a
Yes,
few
I
exceptions.
think prior to me being at the city, they did hire an outside firm for some police chief recruitment. But since I've been here, we've only done outside recruiting firms for city manager positions.
So it's not beyond the scope of, it's a little different position, but scope of
Yeah,
what
it's
you're
not
doing.
beyond the scope, and I would tell you that a lot of it is just making sure that we have a very good position description that we think is gonna attract the candidates, and telling our story a little bit about what we're looking for, and also where the recruiter is gonna recruit from. A lot of those sources we can directly recruit with. We can, if there's certain types of individuals, we can do that, direct recruiting to individuals just as recruitment firms do. So it's really us all working together, either with the internal staff or the recruiter, and crafting what we are looking for in a position description and how we are selling our position and our organization to those candidates.
Thank you, that's all I had. See, that was nice.
Councilman Dobler?
Yeah, I won't support a totally in-house search. I think there has to be somebody. It's not a police chief, it's not a peer to the senior management here. This is their boss. And I think it just needs, we talked about it before, I think it needs an arm's length look by somebody, and I think that can certainly be a local firm. And I think, as you mentioned, it's a hybrid already. There's a lot of things that staff can do. There's some things that the firm can do, but ultimately we need that. We need that bit of impartiality in this process. Thank you.
Further comment, questions? Thank you for your discussion. I think it's been helpful. City manager will have this discussion next week too, apparently.
Yeah, I assume we want to, still it's a discussion item?
I think so. I
we
don't
will-
want to, I want to move fast, but I want to be careful in how we move, so.
And we will provide you more information on the four that have submitted.
Thank you very much. Okay. We will move on the agenda. Next item is 6B, if the clerk would read.
B is discussion in regards to restoring SORT funding that was returned to the debt service fund in 2021.
We have somebody signed up for public comment on this, or would we take that prior to any discussion or presentation from the city manager? Huh? No, just a discussion. Yeah.
If we would like information from staff, Director of Finance, Mr. Wade, can present information to you or provide you information, reference this topic and where we're at.
Councilman Dobler?
Thank you, Mayor. I would just suggest maybe we get a little bit of a presentation from staff. I'm not sure I totally understand the information that's been presented, and then perhaps we could have that, have the outside comments at that point.
Okay.
We have a little bit better understanding. Thank you.
You only have one person signed up, so. Councilwoman Ortiz?
Thank you. I requested that we put this on the agenda, so if I could talk before staff does presentation, I think that will help a little bit, Neil, if I may. because they're gonna have to come back and clean up some things that I'm getting ready to say. So if you don't mind, Mr. Mayor, if you want to hear from the person that signed up, and then if I can be recognized, then we'll have staff come on. I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilwoman. I think I'll do that. I'll ask Mr. Ledbetter if you'll provide your public comments at this point.
Thank you, governing body. I don't mean to preclude anybody from speaking for me. I will hand out an item that I pulled from the agenda, and if you pass that, please, I appreciate it. I support the memorandum from the city manager and from Stephen Wade, Director of Administration and Financial Services. My history with, my reason for being interested in this is this goes back to Highcrest and a SOAR grant that I helped, well, let's just use the word, helped administer as a president. I lobbied for it, and then I wanted to make sure that it all got used effectively, and we were having a really good result. And then at the end of some of the infrastructure work, I asked the then interim manager, Mr. Gerber, and I asked him, where are we at? What is left over? Because I thought that the estimates had come in lower, and I knew there was more money. I mean, I just had the gut, and I could never get an answer from him. Then I went to Sasha, who was over this program, and I asked the same questions, again, as president of Highcrest NIA, and I could not get answers. So I basically took that, well, it's, for lack of a better word, stonewalling, and just packed my tent and left. I wasn't going to get answers. So we had a new manager at that time, and I thought that he would look into this and do something about it, and I never saw that process taken care of. But there is quite a bit of money that is listed as remaining for Highcrest, and Highcrest can definitely use that money, maybe in conjunction with SEND or the NIA, or maybe letting some of this money go to individuals that want to invest in Highcrest. They certainly, I certainly am for that. But I do support that you're going to do this, and I don't want to leave these other NIAs out of it. You know, Oakland, North Topeka East, North Topeka West, I've worked with all of them at some point in the past on different things that I've lobbied for, and if they've got money remaining, and it appears they do, then let them have the money. And the NIAs, I think, are a good investment, and I think that if you put that money in to those NIAs, you'll see a return on investment. I know that Highcrest, the last year I was president, is the following year they did the evaluations. The valuations for Highcrest went up 9% in 1 year, and I think at that time, citywide, the valuations had gone up, it was either 1% or 1.5%. So we were actually starting to do some things that were making a difference over there. And of course, the return on investment is increasing tax base, so I think that should always be part of the equation, and I think the NIAs do that when they get the money they need and spend it in good fiduciary manner and make sure that it actually improves the NIA. That's my comments. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Councilwoman Ortiz, do I understand you would like to speak before the city manager opens this up for discussion and has any information to allow us to consider?
Yes, please.
Okay.
And let me correct myself. I asked that this be on the agenda tonight, and Christina, Councilwoman Christina Badivia-Agla agreed with that, and I believe she might have some comments after me. So it's both of our babies that we've been contending with for over a year. I'll start there. So I sent everybody the agenda for July the 21st, the Oakland Neighborhood Improvement Association agenda for July 21st, 2020. And if you look on there, Bill Cochran was there, and he went up and spoke and said to the NIA that we have found $600,000 for Oakland NIA, which the NIA was very, very happy. I don't know what happened before that, but they knew of that. And I also sent you the agenda where they had put it in their agenda what their understanding of that money was. So you should, everybody should have a copy. If they don't, I'd be happy to get that. After I went to that meeting, I was blown away because I usually do keep up with my NIAs and their SORT programs because there's a process and how they spend it. Luckily in Highcrest, Joe took that project on his own and he said, don't worry about it, Sylvia, so I didn't. But I distinctly remember with Oakland that we had extra money to do this and we had extra money to do that. And so I was very surprised when that money came through. So I called and talked to, the next day I called Steve Wade, had him come meet me at the council office, and he presented me with a sheet and it said that Highcrest would be awarded $224,000. That's what they found. I believe I read that sheet wrong, but that's what my belief was at that time. And so I emailed Highcrest and said, hey, good news, we need to vote on this. I understand it's already been voted on. It's already been approved. And so the ball kind of, everybody got excited. I even had to, to tell interim city manager Cochran, because he was saying, maybe we can do this. And I said, well, we need to stop this dialogue. We need to have a big meeting. We need to decide what we're going to do. Okay, so then after that happened, I met with, talked to different ones of my NIAs. We were trying to plan a meeting. We're trying to figure out how much money we have. Because then it was said, no, there was an email that came out and said, Highcrest only has $100,000. And so I was like, okay, so we have to backtrack. So we're trying to figure that out. And then we had a meeting. It was myself, Councilwoman Christina Valdivia-Acala, Steve Wade, and Bill Cochran. And then they presented us with this executive summary, which everybody should have. I think I emailed you guys that. They had the remaining of the money that was split. We talked about it. And the figures were give or take. I think Christina figured Highcrest might be a little bit higher. So we talked about that with a couple of Christina's other two NIA presidents. And the question that I asked was, how was this money found? And, staff found it. And I said, okay, then why was it returned? Because the money has been, the $600,000 of my knowledge had been returned. And I'm like, why? And they said, well, it was told to us that we should clean this money up and return it because there's no activity on it. Well, there was no activity because when the NIAs were asking members that are not here or employees that are not here, they were saying, just like Joe said, they got stonewalled and they were saying, no, there's no more money. And Joe kept saying, Sylvia, I know there's more money. He even came before the council and said there's more money. So that was very, very alarming. So then we found out, okay, so he gave us that. And then after that, he said, I got an email, just like you guys all got an email, and found out that the numbers are now different. And the reason why I wanted this on the agenda was because it's, and it's nobody to blame. The problem that I have is we need to, I was told that we cannot find any of the records. We can't find out how much money was spent. We're trying to figure it out, but we can't. It'll be tons of man hours. I don't care how many man hours there are. What I care about is that the NIAs get their due process. That's what I care. It's been voted on. If you look, this money was back in, what year was that? 2013, is that right? I'm sorry, okay. And there's a process that they go through. They have to put their program together, they have to go through the sort, they have to be voted on it, it has to be approved by the members on the CAC, and then it has to be brought forward to the council, and then we vote on it. The problem that I have is that when we found this extra money, it should have never been told to one NIA that they had that amount. It should have been brought forth to the four representatives that represented that NIA. That would have been Mike Padilla, myself, Tony Emerson, and Christina Valdiviacula. But it wasn't. It was just said to Oakland that they were the one that got the 600,000. So now we've got a lot of people up in the uproar, and this is how we lose trust in our NIAs and in our citizens. What I said was, because I'm getting different numbers, I'm getting different this and that, and we can't figure it out. And what I want to happen is, I said, put it on the agenda so we could all, as a governing body, discuss this, and we could all make it right, and we can all reinstate this money so that they can get the process, their projects done, that they're due, that they've been promised and that they're due. So again, I know Steve sent some more, and that's why, Neil, I wanted him to go last, so maybe he can explain to me, because I'm totally confused now. I'm totally confused. So that's all I have to say. I will turn it over to Christina or the mayor if she has any comments, but we just have to do a better job of communicating, and we damn sure got to do a better job of making sure that the representatives know before anybody knows, so that this does not happen again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Valdiviacula.
Thank you, Mayor. I think I want to wait until after Steve makes his presentation, because I definitely have additional comments to add to what Councilwoman Ortiz has. But I want to wait until this dialogue fleshes out a little bit more before I add into it.
Okay.
Thank you.
City Manager, do you want to call Mr. Wade?
Mr. Mayor, governing body, I'd like to start with 3 points. The first point is, in 2014 through 2016, CIPs authorized $1.4 million of SORT money to be spent by 4 NIEs, each at $1.4 million. North Topeka West, Highcrest, North Topeka East, and Oakland. IRS regulations required that some of those projects be closed in 2020 with money remaining to be spent on those bonds. We now must close the remaining. You have 3 years to spend money once a bond has been issued. We're at and have exceeded that 3-year bond, that time period, which means we need to close the money. Because the bond has been closed out, we legally had to refund the remaining amount to bondholders. This negated the ability of the NIAs to spend all of the allocated money. With those 3 points, you have received 2 different pieces of documentation, one a week ago and then another one last night. A memo dated February 18, and then a project status report that you received last night. The memo is based on analysis of receipts that have been coded to specific projects. These are those receipts. We've gone through and we've looked to see if a sidewalk, for example, was done, if it was coded to that project, then that expense has been recorded. We did that for all 4 NIAs. After running that math, that leaves you with the math that's on the bottom of this memo which says, for example, Highcrest has spent $789,000 and has $611,000 left to spend. That same works through the other 3 remaining NIAs. That total comes to just under $1.7 million that has not been spent out of the originally allocated $1.4 million for each of the 4 NIAs. That math, again, is based on receipts that were coded to projects. The second document, which was sent last night, was prepared by the Community Engagement Division. It is a project status report, and it breaks down by sort grant projects that had been planned. You'll see on there completed, canceled, rejected as statuses. In most cases, you see a lot of completeds. In looking at the math behind this, there are no financial records to back up those dollar amounts. There were discussions that took place between engineering and community engagement. We believe those are best estimates as to the money that was spent in those cases. All I can work off of from a financial aspect to verify is what's on receipts. This governing body, Mr. Mayor, there's a decision then between completed projects and money that has not been recorded financially, if that makes any sense.
I don't know that it makes any sense, but I'll let you go ahead and continue.
No, and at that point in time, really, Mr. Mayor, we'll stand for questions. The data that we have is before you. There's been a significant amount of research that has gone into this. City manager, I think we've done what we can to try to get to the bottom of this. Certainly had some help from Councilmember Hiller in regard to helping find some information, which was appreciated. We've done what we can on the financial side.
Councilman Dolberg.
If I could we just step back to the very beginning? So
Yes, sir.
in 2014, one or more NIAs was listed in the CIP at $1.4 million. At that point, the city sold bonds for $1.4 million. Is that correct?
Yes.
So $1.4 million cash in the bank, and there's projects to be built from that money. How do those projects come about?
So in this particular case, the SORT program was being run as 2 neighborhoods at a time.
Okay.
And so
Keep it simple. Just talk about the $1.4 million.
Sure, the $1.4 million was set aside. It was split between 2 NIAs. On a financial system at that point in time, we write down what's been spent and is deducted from that $1.4 million.
How do we decide what to spend it on? Mayor, I'm going to just keep
Certainly,
asking
please.
questions if I could.
Sure, and in this particular case, and there's others that can speak better to this, council member, than I can, there was a list of projects that were submitted for consideration. In some cases, those projects were denied, but basically a project budget was built out of this. There are 4 about 90-page documents, one for each of the NIAs, that builds out that plan.
All right. So the money's not totally spent. Once those bonds are sold, you have 3 years.
3 years.
Before arbitrage kicks in. Is that
That's
correct?
That's correct.
All right. So the money that was not spent, based on your memo,
Yes, sir.
what happened to that money?
That money then, in the end of 2020, when the first bond issuance we were doing some cleanup work, we realized we had exceeded the 3 years, and so we refunded the money at that point in time back to bondholders. That money then also goes into our debt service fund. So our debt service fund isn't needed to pay that bond because it's already been paid off.
Okay, explain that. It goes back to the bondholders, but it also goes to the debt service fund.
So the bonds are paid off. The money that was budgeted to go to pay that stuff off,
Okay.
then basically isn't needed. It ends up in the debt service fund.
At an equal amount or more because it's debt service, correct?
That's correct.
All right. What can you do with that debt service fund?
The only thing you can do with that is to pay debt. You can also issue internal notes, in essence, borrow against yourself. So the money that was returned in 2020, you can reissue that amount against yourself. You basically do it for 1 month, and you pay it off, and it's done.
So the 1.6 million right now is sitting in the debt service fund.
That's correct.
And the proposal is not to bond this permanently, which would be future debt service, but to temp note it and then pay off the notes out of the debt service fund.
That's
So
correct.
it's really essentially a cash transaction.
Correct.
I know you don't want to say that, but it is. Okay. That kind of gets me to the point that I think I can participate in the discussion. Thank you,
Yes, sir.
Mayor.
Further questions for Mr. Wade? Councilwoman Hiller?
Just while he's still up, you touched on it, but if I understand correctly from what I learned, when I saw this for the first time on Friday night, I just went, what is that? And however did this happen? And started asking some questions. And as Mr. Wade described, apparently the work that was done before, if you will, sort of started working backwards from the financial trail, and that people along the way had said, we need to start with a project list and look at what got done. But until we talked on Friday, and I too said there has to be a project list and this is where you would find it, nobody had processed this debacle, or whatever you want to call it, by starting with the project list.
That's correct.
Thank you. I found it fascinating that the project list then that the staff had been keeping showed that the dollars were all spent. I mean, if you look at those, they each, the two pairs total 2.8 million together. They're not exactly balanced internally. One is a little higher. A couple of them are, Oakland and Highcrest are over the 1.4 million if you count their own up. And the other two are a little short. Having lived through this process many times, there are, I mean, I asked a question and looked at the CIP. You have to take those forms that we got and then calculate roughly 10%. I asked Steve, I said, how does this go in the books? It gets done as a journal entry, so they're not on community engagement sheets, but there was an expectation, obviously, that the engineering would be charged. There also have been collateral projects that have been funded with other money that have happened in the neighborhoods along the way. So just to kind of reiterate back to where he kind of ended up, you know, the issue is, where do we leave this when we get done? Do we look at starting with projects and did the projects get done versus just what apparently is a confusing trail financially? So it's kind of fascinating, difficult. Thank you.
Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala?
Thank you, Mayor. I think that what council, I don't want to speak for Sylvia, but I think that some of the dialogue that Sylvia and I had in the meeting where we had with Stephen Wade, interim city manager, myself, Representative Ortiz, and the NIAs, that was at a juncture when, I'm just going to be really honest, I realized that I needed to be communicating with Sylvia and other folks that were in this, because there was a incredible lack of communication that was going on. And believe me when I say in the future, moving forward, when it comes to our NIAs that we share, I think that it is vital that we all collaborate and come to the table on this. I was extraordinarily beside myself when we had this meeting and found out that not only were the NIAs not communicated with on any of this, but that the representatives that represent these NIAs were not communicated with at all. I know that Oakland, and I don't know, Sylvia recalls, I think it was like Emil Spaeth had sent in numerous complaints about projects not having been done. So I don't know how that all rolls out. But this is the other thing that I'm going to say about that meeting. We were given numbers in that meeting that were stated as final numbers, which is then why Sylvia said we need to get this on the discussion, on the agenda for discussion. And then we talked about ways in which, where it could be found. Then we get this series of printouts the other day, and I'm just going to say, Councilwoman Hiller, that I take deep offense to knowing that there was all of this communication going on behind, you know, whatever, what Sylvia, what Councilwoman Ortiz and I were trying to do, and all of this was being undone in some ways and questioned. And I know that you've had real issue with when other people in this council have taken up for your district and you were not involved. And I take extreme offense to this because Sylvia and I had been participating in so many meetings. Her with her NIAs, me with my NIAs, then we got together and we had these meetings. We were at this set point. We had received all of the paperwork, and now we're back to this. I believe what interim city manager is saying and what Stephen Wade are saying about this being the point that we are at. It is unfortunate that there are a number of city employees that are no longer with us, that can't put this 2,500 piece puzzle together, that there's 500 pieces floating around somewhere and we don't know where that is. But this has gone on for over a year. I look back into when I was first informed about it, and it was back in May of 2021. So yeah, about a year. And I'm sure that, you know, Councilwoman Ortiz can speak to this. I am in support of this because these NIAs have been dragged around. These NIAs have believed that they have had money or had no communication about where they stood. And I just think that after a mess this big, I am wanting to stay with the numbers that the councilwoman and I had in a meeting with our NIAs. Thank you.
Councilman McHale.
Main thing I think we need to do is the city needs to communicate with the NIAs because I went to the High Crest meeting. Ms. Villavia was blamed for this money going away. They were dead set that she'd taken the money away from that NIA. And there's been a lot of issues with the NIAs. And there's turnovers. Then we had COVID. And so I understand this is prior to that also, but in the projects. But there's a lot of turnover in NIAs. And these are communities we're talking there on upswing, especially like High Crest with what Sen's been doing there and some other organizations. We have communities that are going on the upswing, and just to kind of take this money, and we need to make sure we're looking at ways to get this money back into those communities and look at those projects that are already on the books of as possible projects that weren't finished, and try to get these things. And like I said, we need to communicate as the city side to the citizens in the NIAs on what's going on, because it just looks like the council is, oh, we're just going to take this money back. You guys don't need it anymore. And that's not the case at all. I understand you have to follow the rules you have to follow on bonds and things like that, but it needs to be put out there, because first thing when I walked in the door at that NIA meeting was they were wondering what Councilwoman Valeria did with her money and why she took it.
Well, I'll just speak briefly to that, but there's something else I want to ask Mr. Wade. That misinformation was not only in Highcrest, okay? And I think a lot of rumors got started, and it really was unfortunate that it included some of the council members looking at each other, that maybe they had been trying to deplete funds from their NIAs, and that's just not the case. So as far as I know, no one took any actions like that, but it was not expressed that way. The one thing I want to ask Mr. Wade is, right now, do the NIAs have money available to them for projects?
Technically, yes. And I say that because we have not yet closed that second series of bonds, which by IRS regulations we need to do.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers, I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, for the NIAs, right now, if the request is to restore money or put money into the NIAs, for the NIAs so that they can spend on projects, do they have money right now without us doing that?
They have some. In this particular case, I can give you what those dollar amounts are.
Okay.
So these are the dollar amounts, Councilwoman, that we discussed in our meeting along with Councilwoman Ortiz. North Topeka West has unspent a little over $136,000. It's 136,195. Highcrest, $100,000. Oakland, $100,000. North Topeka East, 474,759.
And those monies are available now. Is there an expiration for them to use those monies right now?
That expiration is basically now.
Right now. So they would have to have projects, and how would they have projects that they could submit if it has to be done now? So do they have like a week, 2 weeks, whatever?
What we would have to do, Mr. Mayor, is basically, if we were challenged by the government, we would say that due to extraordinary circumstances, there was a delay in spending these funds. Certainly COVID-19 will help that.
I see a hand from Councilwoman Ortiz, and I believe Councilman Lesser also, and Councilwoman Valdivia-Acla in that order. Councilwoman Ortiz first, please.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, their projects are already approved and they already know what they are, and they can only use this money for the projects that's been approved and that they brought to the table. And you know, they know what those are. With all due respect, Brent, I will get with you so you understand this. There has been a lot of back and forth of this person tried to take this and this person, but at the end of the day, we don't need staff going to them. We are their representatives, and we need to pick a date, which that's what I told Highcrest. I will pick a date and have staff come out, and we will go over and so that the NIA can vote on it. and we can get it on the record and we can bring it back. But they can't just use this money for anything. There's projects that's already been approved, and that's what they have to stick with at this point. And so, to Mr. Wade, who I'm sorry, has caught all the heat on this. So the monies due is what you just, or the monies that they will receive. This is just a rough figure, correct? What you just read off, is that correct?
I'm sorry?
She asked if,
The money that you read off, North Topeka West, 136,195, High Creston Oakland, 100,000, and North Topeka East, 474,759 is just an estimate, right? There could possibly be more, but for right now, this is the monies that we see.
These are solid numbers based on the remaining bonds that are still open.
Okay. So these are the monies that I'm gonna go back to my NIA and say this is what they have. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am?
Okay. All right. And so that's what I will be doing. I know Christina, I know she's worked with Oakland, and I know that they've got some projects, but we need to remember what we voted on and what we approved is what is the only thing that they can use those monies for. They can't come up with a new bridge, can't come up with a new side or curbs or something. I mean, I think it was infrastructure. Am I correct, Steve?
Yes, ma'am?
So they know what they can do, but that's what I will be pushing for, to go back to the NIAs and have them approve it, prove what they want to do, and then bring it back to staff. I'll have staff there to answer any questions and then bring it back so that we all get a clear understanding for this. And then I guess we'll figure out the rest of the money. Is that right?
Yes, the rest of it needs to be figured out as to whether or not the first bonds that were closed are basically going to be made good back.
Okay.
The dollar.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I just wanted to make sure so that in my mind, before we go changing anything again, I wanted to make sure it was on record, and that's my understanding. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
okay. Councilman Lesser and then Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala.
Yeah, Steve, are you still at the podium?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Rod, do have a question. So is there also a way, could we possibly, because of the inconsistencies, is there a way that for validation, we could back into this another way? Is there a list of these projects that, because we're talking 2014, right?
Yes, sir.
Do we have a list of what the projects were that were applied for, that were approved, et cetera, of all those projects at that point in time? I mean, I know we don't necessarily have, trying to locate the receipts, the fund, all those type of things, but do we have, where I'm thinking is, the different presentations we've received in the past for different sort of projects, and, here's what it is, here's what we're doing. Do we have those documents of showing, is this 1, 2, 3, 4 things in High Crest and 1, 2, 3? Do we have that type of list that exists?
We have the list that was originally approved as part of the SORT program for each one of those 4 NIAs.
Okay. Have we cross-checked to see of those projects that were approved, how many of those were actually done?
Yes, sir. The document that came out last night shows a completed status or a status for each one of those projects.
So that just becomes a little bit disconcerting to, I mean, I'm trying to balance the fact that we have X amount of dollars, we approved these amount of projects, every project that was on the list that was approved is done. I guess I'm trying to understand then, I'm trying to understand if it is accurate, whether or not there is money left over, or there's not money left over. You following me?
I do, and that's, Councilman, that's where I'm saying, if a invoice was basically coded differently, let's say a sidewalk was coded to a pedestrian program instead of sort, then that money would show up somewhere else. And that's something that is very difficult to find.
Well, and that's where my concern is, where the thing that's really easy to find is if a bridge was approved to be put in over XYZ Creek and the bridge is approved over XYZ Creek, I don't know necessarily that I need to have a receipt to know that thing was done. And I certainly don't believe that it was done for free. Somewhere it was paid for, is what I'm getting at.
Understood.
Okay. That helps me understand where we're at in the landscape. Thank you.
Councilwoman Bodie.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. So this is, and I know that Councilwoman Ortiz will probably remember this, when we had our meeting with the NIA presidents, except for Highcrest wasn't there, and Stephen Wade and interim city manager, we were presented with this memorandum, and it was the numbers that were just given. North Topeka West, 136, 195, Highcrest, 100,000, Oakland, 100,000, North Topeka East, 100,000, 474, 759. So Sylvia and I were both told at this meeting with the NIA people, this is what's available. If y'all don't want it, if y'all don't agree with this, then we're gonna send it all back and that's your only option. So then we pushed back on it and we had more conversation about it. No, that's not, we don't think that that's correct. There is still something out there. So then everybody ran upstairs and then we got this that you all got in your email today, which has a breakdown as of 1/28 of 2022. And it shows what the grand total that's been spent so far. So the numbers changed in that meeting, and Sylvia and I were calculating it by text. She'll remember, I sent her a text and I go, Sylvia, all of this is adding up, but I think we're about $50,000 off. Then we got with Steve Wade, and Steve said, no, this is the new figure. And he sent us a picture of it on the board, and it had the 1.6, whatever this total is, 1.676368. So when we start having these conversations, and I think that Councilwoman Ortiz and I realize this really quick, how fast these conversations can start going south with all the monies that start getting, this is this, and this is this, and this is this. But this was all verified in this meeting and verified that with the NIAs that this was what was going out. So I just want to be clear, as when Councilwoman Ortiz asked that question about how much was actually available, we still got those added figures, which made an increase on all 4 NIAs. Thank you, Mayor.
Deputy, did you want to? Okay, Councilman Cowan, then Deputy Mayor Duncan.
Thank you, Mayor. What I was kind of getting at is communicating is making sure that these get out to the NIA so they actually have, going back to what Mr. Ortiz said, but why, my question is a little bit is, why if Highcrest spent the least amount, they only have $100,000 left, but you have someone like North Peak East that spent the second lowest amount has $400,000. Are each projects, were they kind of designated to different bonds? Or, is this kind of, that's just a little different to me that one community or one area has spent the least and then they are tied with the lowest amount left?
Yes, sir, on different bonds. There was roughly $865,000 that was returned when we closed the first set of bonds.
I was wondering, because it seems, I thought this was all one big pot, so I wasn't sure, that in essence, in that situation, it should kind of almost be divvied up with the percentage spent versus the percentage remaining, kind of seems like to me,
So these were actually, Highcrest was one of the first ones.
Okay.
And so they were impacted among the highest when the money was returned from that refund of the first issuance of bonds.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor. We've cross-pollinated a little in the sense that part of this conversation is the bonds from a few years ago and then the bonds that are expiring now, right? So some of that crossover's happened. But I guess here's my 2 cents. In the proposal in front of us, I don't think any of us know what the hell happened. I mean, the people who sort of did this aren't here anymore. And we can't look at them right now and say, what were you doing, what were you thinking, and what was happening? All I know is I have seen several minutes from multiple meetings. I have talked to council members Ortiz and Valdivia-Alcala. I have heard from members in these NIAs. And it seems to me at that time, there was little to no communication that those were expiring or what was happening. And when there was, it may have been very complicated, convoluted, and confusing. That's the story that seems pretty whole from enough people that it makes sense to me. So for me, that's kind of where we're at, and I feel like we have some responsibility to correct that error, and I can support making this whole, fixing that problem and saying, we've closed that door, we've fixed that problem, we've good faith effort to those members of those communities who would like to see us do that, and there's that. The second thing then is the money that's expiring. I don't know what the process has been for communication currently with those NIAs to give them heads up and warnings and fair notice over the past 6 months to a year that said, hey, if you don't spend this by this date or give us projects, that money's going out the door. And so we've got to do a better job of that and making sure that that doesn't happen moving forward if there's another round of these after those deadlines expire. And my third point is I hope that part of that is less likely to happen because of the changes we made a year and a half plus now through our Public Infrastructure Committee, where some of this comes up because of things that are looked at, different programs. I don't know that that's all the problem, but I'm hoping we've added a few layers through some of these processes of looking at bonds and projects, and maybe that'll catch it. But hopefully we can correct whatever's gone on with these last 2 rounds this next time and make sure, because the key to this really seems to be not giving enough communication to these NIAs so they understand the timelines of when these dollars run out. And that's where we've gotten in trouble. So it's a collective damn, and I think this has been a good conversation to move us to this not happening again. So I appreciate all the work, Steve, you've put into this and everyone else. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. If I could respond to a couple points. One, I can thankfully tell you there is not another round. And the second part is, if you do issue the internal temp bonds for the just under $1.7 million, that takes the deadline off of this second round and basically resets the clock to a 3-year clock.
Okay. I have a question, but Councilman Emerson, go ahead. If we do that, what's the mechanism, what's it going to cost the city to do that? Are we going to have to bond that?
We do an internal bond. The cost to the city is about $5,000. We have bond counsel draw up the paperwork. In April, we would present that bond to you for approval. You approve the bonds. We issue them to ourselves, and then we pay them back as we've done with earlier this year and last year. So your total cost to the city is about $5,000.
Thank you. Councilman Emerson?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, and I guess Mr. Wade already kind of answered this, but that was going to be my thought as well. Let's take the pressure off trying to spend $100,000, $474, 136, and instead do the whole amount, take the time pressure off, make sure it's then a process where NIAs can weigh in and they can get, we're not just trying to quickly spend $100,000 and all this. So I would very much, I would very much support doing that. I think it's the right thing to do. We made a commitment, even though it wasn't a commitment, well, a couple of you made on this, but, it's a commitment the city made to NIAs, and, I go to these NIA meetings, and I think there's a real feeling sometimes that they're not heard, or that it's kind of a shell game, that the city can play with them. And I think we need to show that we're serious. When we make a commitment to do something, we are going to, we're going to follow through with it. It's the right thing to do. I hate spending money if it doesn't need to be spent, but we've committed to them. And even if we find out that, well, there's maybe a project here or there that wasn't accounted for, I don't think anybody's going to argue we've overinvested in any of these neighborhoods, So that would be I would definitely support doing the 1.676 internally and making these NIAs whole.
I have assured the city manager, and I'll assure this council, that we've made internal changes so this does not happen again.
Have you ever heard the saying, "Don't shoot the messenger"? I think there's some arrows in your front there. Thank you, Mr. Wade. I do appreciate it. I know this was not a mess of your making, and either of you, and I do appreciate getting straightened out.
Sure, thank you.
Councilman Kell.
The only point on that, I do agree with Mr. Emerson on that one, sorry.
Henderson.
I believe that the amounts need to go, that they're already on this memo that we received here. The High Crest gets to 610, the Oakland's 215, so we can keep on working on those projects that those NIAs already did and were approved by the councils before us.
Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm very troubled by this. Let me say at first, I absolutely, as much as anybody else, want to make sure that the neighborhoods are made whole. But I think there's a reconciliation that has to happen. If part of this happened because people bonded the money long before the projects ever got done, we had them in a big pot, and it was hard to keep track of them, and then when the department sent the bills over, they didn't code them correctly, and this is maybe mostly a financial thing. I think that it's critical that there be a reconciliation between this project list, and, forgive me, all I did was ask the same questions you all had and didn't get an answer. I had no idea what these project lists would look like, but I too said, you need to go find them, they must exist. If all of the projects that the neighborhoods asked for are done, then there's nothing left on the list. And if there was an issue with how they were coded, or maybe we got grant money and used grant money instead of the bond money, and so there's bond money left over, but the sidewalks got put in, then what has been proposed is to recreate the same thing, or maybe worse than happened before. If we borrow money up front, put it on the table, and the NIAs don't have any remaining projects to go against, then what we're doing is throwing up and saying, we'll come up with something really fast, let's spend this money. And so, Councilwoman Ortiz had said earlier that they needed to look at the projects that were already approved. I don't know if these lists are correct. They look pretty good. But if nobody has ever looked at what the project lists were, we all know, those of us who've gone through with NIAs that had sort money, that they start out and work on a list, and sometimes for one reason or another, a project gets changed. It appears on these lists that we got this weekend that happened, but the totals wash out with the allowances. Again, I want to make sure that the neighborhoods are made whole. But I think if we were going to consider doing that, doing something like a guarantee that they would be made whole, with the project audit corresponding to what we had apparently with trying to track the finances from the back end back to the front, would let us settle and figure out what projects were not completed that were committed, so we could follow through, at least reconcile whatever this money thing is that Steve inherited, and and making sure that their projects got done. I don't want us to just put the NIAs in a pickle. One of the concerns we've had about this sort was just figure out a way to spend it. And so I think we could make the NIAs whole without exactly what's been proposed. So I'll leave it at that.
Councilwoman Ortiz and then Councilman Kell.
Thank you. There are projects that have not been done, and in that meeting, or maybe it was an NIA meeting, the president had talked about when the city came out and said, hey, you got this amount of money left, and they talked about doing sidewalks, and I don't remember what meeting that is, maybe Christina can remember, but he talked about, you guys never came back. I know High Crest, they have stuff that has not been done as well, because Joe was keeping track of that, and we had stuff that was coming in under bid, and he said, you know, we should have more money, and they have projects that have not been done. This is such a mess, and it's gone on for so long, Karen, with all due respect. I want to push this forward and move forward. The NIAs deserve that. It is not their fault that this has come to this. It is not Steve Wade's fault that he inherited this mess. But I brought it to the table because, you know what? If we keep waiting and keep digging, we're going to get to, oh, it's this, it's that. No, let's move forward. Let's move forward. I feel, I'm not going to speak for Steve. I guess he can speak, but he feels confident in this, and these numbers, we've talked about it, and I think his staff feels comfortable in this. And I would do this for any NIA, even if it wasn't mine. You know, I only have an investment in 2, but these parts of towns, they deserve this. They need this. And I say let's move forward. I'm not going to continue to ask staff to waste time, and I just hope my colleagues, I wanted them to see what a mess was. I can't explain it. Again, I thank Steve for hanging in there and taking the bullets, as Mr. Henderson said, and get out of my damn seat. But anyway, I just appreciate that. We need to move forward. We need to move forward. Thank you.
Councilman Kell, then Councilman Dobler, did you also?
Well, just like the others, I'd like to thank Mr. Wade and the councilwomen that have, and everyone else that's been involved in trying to go through this mess. When you're trying to deal with numbers, it can just become such a stressful headache to deal with. But to go to what Councilwoman Miller was saying, yeah, if the project's already been done, knock it off the list, whatever. I'm not saying go back and redo that, but there's projects that might have been left off of other things because they're on the sort list and they haven't been done for 10 years. And they've been almost promised for 10 years that these will be done because they're on the sort list, so the city doesn't add it to anything else. And so when you sit there and you're waiting, now we have a chance to go back and say, okay, yep, sorry we made you wait, but here you go. We can get those projects knocked out in those areas that may not have been taken care of before because, or if they had been taken care of, like Mr. Wade said, miscoded and put somewhere else, okay, we just knocked that one off the list. And I'm not saying, like you said, don't bring anything new, but we can look at the stuff that's been overlooked for the last 10 years.
Councilman Dobler?
Thanks, Mayor. 2 quick questions, Steve. The city used to tempt their projects until they were complete and all the costs were known.
Your mic, please.
Sorry, I'll repeat my question. The city used to temp note projects until they were complete, all the costs were known, and then they sold the permanent bonds. Why did we change that practice? Do you know?
That is our standard practice. I can't tell you why these were bonded in advance.
What typically happens, so let's forget the SORT program for a minute. Let's say a street project, the estimate's $2 million, and you sell $2 million worth of bonds, correct, up front?
Correct.
If it comes in at 1.8, what happens to the remainder?
So the additional 200 then is returned to the bondholders, which then, in essence, puts $200,000 into the debt service fund.
Okay, does that make sense? Because it doesn't to me.
So, in the case, and I'm going to speculate a little bit, but in the case of a program like this one, there's a reasonable certainty that the project is going to be completed. Rather than taking the expense of a temp bond. Most likely, the decision was made at that point in time, let's put it in the permanent bonds. There's 3 years to expend the funds. It's almost a guarantee that that's going to happen. I suspect that that was the rationale at the time. Yeah, obviously it didn't happen.
Was that back when interest rates were 6, 7, 8%?
Yes,
Temp
sir.
notes were 2 or 3 points higher than permanent? Hasn't really been the case in the last few years. I would suggest we just take a look at that and figure out why we do that, because it doesn't make sense to me. The second question, I believe reading the agenda item, the administration's recommendation is to pass this, whatever adds up to $1.6 million. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
That's your recommendation? Is that Mr. Cochran's recommendation?
I'm not going to speak for the city manager.
I will ask him that question directly then. Just a nod of your head over your phone.
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. I would support that then. Thank you very much.
Councilman Emerson, then Councilman Lesser.
Mayor, I guess then maybe a procedural question for our city attorney. Ms. Stanley, this is a discussion item tonight. Do we need to have it for action next week if that's what we want to do? Or do we just simply need to direct staff to do this?
At some point, if we're bonding, we're gonna have to approve all the bond documents, which I don't know how quickly Steve can get those ready to go.
It'll be April.
So it would have to be April, based off the length of time to create the bond documents. You could make a motion, if you waived your rule to not act on a non-action item, to direct staff to proceed with bond documents, and you could do that tonight.
I guess I would leave that maybe up to my colleagues that have done more work on this, if they want to make that, or if not, it would be for action next week for us to.
I think this is where you're at after listening to all of you, is I do believe staff probably needs some indication on whether or not to proceed with bond documents. I think you can I can probably guess where most people are. Steve could proceed having those ready, and then they still have to come back for a final vote in April. As your city attorney, I always like when things are crystal clear, though. So if you wanted to waive your rules tonight and proceed, make a motion to proceed, great. Otherwise, crystal clear next week would be to take action next week and proceed to bonding.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to follow the recommendation of our city attorney. Keep things crystal clear. We're trying to clean things up. Let's make sure we do it the right way and don't act too soon and end up in the same spot down the road. So that would be my hope, is that we have completed our discussion. We'll put it on the agenda for next week and give that opportunity so that all that information can be presented for a clear action if that's what is desired by the body. Okay? No further discussion? Checking around, making sure. Councilman Lesser.
Yeah, Steve, couple cleanup questions. So the cost of doing this is, did you say was only gonna be $5,000?
That's approximately correct.
And what's that for, Steve?
It's legal fees with our bond counsel, and then we have to charge ourselves a small amount of interest to be fair, and so call it 1 point.
Is this, and this is a dual question for you and Amanda, and I asked this just because I know things are tight, coffee makers and all that good stuff, but is this something that the documents can be, does this something have to go out to bond counsel? Is this something that internally we could do ourselves with these documents.
I would really prefer use the expertise of bond counsel on this one.
So that'll come out of your budget then, let me write that down quick.
I feel like it's Steve's budget at this point.
Another question, this final question that clearly this is not an area of my expertise, but is there, when this was bonded back in 2014, and I have, honestly, I have the most confidence in Kevin Cowan and our current bond attorney. I think he's fantastic. But is there any culpability of the bond counsel we had back then? Is that all done on the front end, or is there any responsibility for a situation like this of due diligence on our bond counsel at the end of a project like this that allowed this mess that we could go back and have a conversation with, or is that not an option?
So, council member, I would tell you that it was working with bond counsel on this situation that we've been able to avoid arbitrage. And so really it was on their recommendation that we started closing these projects. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I think they've done us some help.
But I'm saying, I don't believe those were our counsel at the time. I don't believe that was our bond counsel in 2014 when these projects and when this issue started. Is that correct?
It's up to us to spend it.
I don't know the answer to that.
I guess to try to answer the question, council member, generally, they probably told us at the time, none of us were here, I guess some of you were, but they probably told us you had 3 years to close them out. So the liability probably rests with city staff that did not follow up and actually make sure that occurs.
That's what I'm looking for. There's no diligence on their part they're required to do that then?
Likely not.
Okay, thank you.
Further discussion? None? Thank you, Stephen, for standing for the question. Just a minute. Councilwoman Ortiz.
I just want to say to my colleagues and to staff, thank you. This wasn't easy to bring forward, but it had to be done, and I wanted to say thank you. And to staff, I really, really want to reiterate, you've got to make sure that when we're doing stuff like that and we find stuff, we get with the council reps and we know who the reps are. There's several of us that represent different NIAs together, and that's very, very important so that it doesn't look like one's working against the other. And I just can't stress that enough. But to my colleagues, I want to say thank you for supporting this. And thank you for moving this forward. It's something that has to be done, and I appreciate all the work that the finance department has dug and dug and done. And I can't say this enough. It's not our current staff. This was staff that is no longer with us. Again, I say thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilwoman, and myself, Steve. Thank you very much for working with the city manager and with the council members who have brought questions to you and asked for information. I appreciate your responses to them, and I agree that timely responses are important for all of us to avoid misunderstandings.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you again.
Thank you, sir.
We'll move on now to public comment. We have 3 people signed up. One of them's bailing on us right now.
The other two aren't here. I know them.
Oh, you're?
I don't know.
I'll call it anyway. I will call the people, Dominic Montero. Dominic Montero. Okay. Drake Roach. Drake Roach. And Mr. Ledbetter just left the building. So We have no one for public comment. We'll move to announcements, if the clerk would read.
Okay, for the March 8th agenda, we have one presentation with the Topeka Human Relations Commission Annual Report. On the consent agenda, we have an expenditure ordinance, and we have 5 professional services contracts. Let's see, for action item, we have the resolution that we just discussed for internal notes and 1.6 million. And then we have 2 non-action items. The first one is the Policy and Finance Committee report for ARPA application process, and the second will be for the city manager recruitment process.
Thank you. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. The only thing that I got is Thursday, myself, the mayor, HR Director, Ms. Russell, and Community Engagement Director, Monique Glade, will be making a trip over to Kansas City, Missouri, just to talk to staff over there about how they do certain things when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and just operations of some of their processes.
Thank you. Nothing further. We'll move on to Councilwoman Hiller.
Nothing, thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Valdivia Acala.
Thank you, Mayor. Just wanted to express prayers and support for all of those that are suffering in this crisis in the Ukraine, and those that are standing up, you know, in Russia. And I would say for all locations around the world that are suffering from that oppression and wartime situations. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Sylvia Ortiz. Councilwoman?
Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Mayor. I just want to remind everybody not to forget about the dinosaurs that are here in North Topeka and at the zoo and at, you know, at the Discovery Center. They're really cool, and we're blessed to have them. So don't forget about the dinosaurs. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You're welcome. Councilman Emerson.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to follow up with what Councilwoman Valdivia Acala said, and just say we stand with the people of Ukraine. And I just want to thank you, Mayor, for your press conference you had yesterday and what the partnership's doing downtown at Evergy Plaza. I mean, it's a small thing, but you know, this is a rare time when almost the entire world's has risen up against that terrible outrage. So, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Kell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this Thursday and Friday is state for a little-known sport that gets little coverage, and that's state bowling for 6 and 5A. And we had some area schools, some Topeka schools qualify. We had the Washburn Rural female team with Kaylee Hart, Amaya Buchanan, Gabby Martinez, Taylin Sakers, Caitlin Doyle, and Claire Ireland, and with Washburn Rural girls team, and then a Washburn Rural boy, Josh Hammonds, qualified individually. And on the 5A side of things, we had Topeka Seaman boys qualify, and that's Draven Townsend, Alexander Prescott, Riley Parkers, Xander White, Jack Eastman, and Ethan Burns. The Shawnee Heights boys team qualified, which is Chris Coyce, Caleb Rourke, Aiden Van Meter, Josh Egley, Evan McGlinton, Jonathan Dela Cruz, and Cole Rodriguez from Topeka West qualified as an individual. And then with Topeka Seaman girls qualified as a team with Kayla Mize, Jalen Thetford, Caitlin Evans, Cheyenne Turkin, Katie Price, Mackenzie Millard. Shawnee Heights had an individual and Carly Gilliland. And the team I'm personally most proud of is the Topeka West girls team qualified as a team. And that's Megan Wood, Brenna Rushman, Kendra Umscheid, Hannah Allen, Carly Gelbreth, and my 2 favorite, Chase Kell and Reagan Kell. The sport of bowling doesn't get recognized in CJ and WWW and all that. And these kids put in all the hard work from December tryouts to March state, and they travel around and go at it every day and, put in the same work that the other sports do. So I just want to recognize those kids for the accomplishment of making it to state as a team and individuals.
Congratulations to them. Councilwoman Nager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to also thank you for the words that you said yesterday and the actions that we're taking as a community to recognize the people of Ukraine. And it's also a good time to just recognize that this sort of stuff happens in the world outside of what we are comfortable with. This is something that is important to all of us. And whenever you feel moved to take action, make sure that you are taking action. A few things that are going on in Topeka. I just wanted to bring attention to the fact that it's Women's History Month, and that Go Topeka is promoting a women's forum. It's for men and women, and so it's good to make sure that you are educating yourself about what's happening not only with your demographic, but the demographics around you, especially because we can see that in Kansas, that women's median earnings are almost 10% lower than the US median for men. And that's for white women. For women of color and for men of color, this is very, very different. And so to educate yourself on those sorts of issues, especially if you're in an employer, I would highly encourage you to go ahead and be a part of this Women's Forum. It is on March 16th. It's a Wednesday. It's from 9, I'm getting a thumbs up from Councilwoman Ortiz, and so I feel great. From 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the Beacon, which actually historically was a women's club in downtown Topeka. You can go to gotopeka.com/women's forum to go ahead and register. And then just because apparently all I need is Ortiz's validation today, this is where you can go get information about TopekaDinoDays.com. You can get combination tickets. You can find out about different promotions going on with other restaurants and venues in town that are not the sites of the major attractions that have been brought in. But I'm really, really proud of Sean Dixon and his team for working with these different organizations to go ahead and bring these things to the Northeast Kansas area. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing Sue again. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilman Dover.
Nothing, Mayor, thank you.
Deputy Mayor Duncan.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a few quick things. I want to thank Positive Connections. They had a chili feed this past weekend. Council members Kell, Lesser, and myself were 3 of the 7 judges. We ate a lot of chili. Most of it came out fine later. It was all right. We're not too spicy, but I appreciate it. It was a good fundraiser for Positive Connections, who helps individuals with HIV in this community and some other similar diseases. But so that was a fun event. Second thing is, today the Policy and Finance Committee met. We opened up the discussion on the application for the ARPA funds. We sort of have a timeline. Don't get too excited. We don't have a bunch of work product that came out of it. We have talked about some desires for that application. Staff and I are going to hopefully have a rough draft in a few weeks. If all goes well, pencil this in. Don't write it in pen. We think we can have something to you at some point in April, probably mid to late April, to actually look at and give us some feedback on and keep that process moving forward. But the other announcement out of that is, on Wednesday, March 23rd at 6 p.m. at the Holiday Building, and staff's going to put out a press release, and we'll make sure this gets out there. We will have public input, so people can come and give us some thoughts on what they'd like to see that application look like and some of the parameters. That'll be sort of the focus of that, but we want to give people an opportunity to chime in on that before we bring a rough draft to you. So that'll be on Wednesday, March 23rd in the evening. And the last thing is, this will be the first Saturday of the month, which means you can come harass me at Fairlawn Plaza from 9 to 11 a.m. If you want to come talk to me about ARPA, there's your chance, or anything else you want to throw at me. So thank you very much, Mayor.
Hiding behind the kiosk, because I saw it. Councilman Lesser.
Just a couple things. I just want to draw attention, if you do get a chance, anyone who is having COVID long haul symptoms, there is, go to the I should have done a Hannah deal here, but,
Let's see that sketch.
there's a WIBW, if you go to their site, there's a link you can fill out as they're looking for people with, unfortunately, people like myself who have long haul symptoms, that, a study that they are doing, through, I believe Saint and Mayo is doing, that they want people to sign up and help out with that. So I would encourage you to do that. Lastly, wanted to thank Positive Connections as well. Was a great event. Was nice to see those things starting to open up for those type of organizations, to be able to help with their fundraising. It was a well-attended event. Really good chili, as Spencer said. I enjoyed it. I have been told by my wife, though, after coming home to watch 1883 with her, that I am not allowed to judge again. I can only write a check for a donation because of some of the lingering effects of the...
Mute. Wish I had a mute button. I don't know.
No, it was a great time, great organization, and it was great to be able to do that. That's all I got.
Thank you. I would like to take a moment to respond to the comments made about the press conference that we had down at Evergy Plaza in support of the Ukraine nation and their fight to remain a democratic country and not come under the rule of Russia. That idea, which I think is extremely a smart, good idea, came from our own Gretchen Spiker. So I want to thank her for being able to put that together very quickly. It was a good idea. Thank you, Gretchen. That being all we have in the way of announcements, there is a need for an executive session this evening. If the city attorney would read, please.
The motion would be to recess into executive session not to exceed 60 minutes to discuss candidates for the fire chief position and other personnel matters related to other individual city employees pursuant to KSA 75-4319B1. The open meeting will resume in the city council chambers. The following staff may be needed to assist the governing body in its deliberation: interim city manager Cochran and any other staff he deems necessary.
The chair will entertain a motion. Motion to move into executive session by Councilman Dobler and a second by Councilman Kell. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. We will adjourn into executive session after a short 10-minute break. Thank you. I was ready for that too, buddy. You didn't have to remind me. I'm not going to kibitz. I'm gone. We're coming out of executive session. No action has been taken by the governing body. If there's no further business appearing before the governing body, this meeting is adjourned.
Okay.
Double tap. I'm done.